Great. Welcome to this very, I think, exciting panel on responsible management of ocean minerals resources. We are very honored to have with us today excellent panelist, His Excellency Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, and Michael Lodge, Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority. But before turning to our two distinguished guests and panelists, let us just zoom out and highlight a few important facts about ocean mineral resources. You all know that more than 70% of our planet is covered by ocean, and 90% of these oceans constitute the deep sea. So that's more than half of this planet. Deep sea harvesting and mining is a process of retrieving mineral deposits from the deep seabed, often 3 to 6 kilometers under the sea surface, and also very often in international waters, but it can also be in exclusive economic zone. This is regulated by the International Framework of Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, but also when you talk about ocean minerals located within states' exclusive economic zones, it falls under the jurisdiction of the coastal state. So in any case, what we're dealing with, and I look forward to this discussion, is a common heritage of mankind, and our actions should benefit mankind as well, also according to UNCLOS. So let me start with this question first for you, Mr. Secretary General Michael Lodge. Why are seabed mineral resources so important? There are plenty of places around the world where we can mine for minerals. Why go to the bottom of the sea? Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Jeppe. Well, yes, you're right. There is no geological shortage of minerals. The question is where to get them from. I guess the simple and slightly glib answer is that why the sea? Because seabed minerals are very abundant and they are very high grade. They're actually found everywhere in the world's oceans, very, very widely distributed. There are particular areas that are of much more prospective interest than others, and of course there are particular countries, actually quite a few countries, that have very promising resources inside their own national jurisdiction as well. But why the interest in the sea now? And I really think it is, we're going through a period now where there has never been such interest in seafloor minerals since the 1970s. And I think the main reason for that is probably that we've seen over the last, let's say, 10 years or so, an incredible revolution in ocean technology. Really, we using artificial intelligence, using autonomous underwater vehicles, high-tech equipment, really we can find out much more easily, much less expensively than we could before. So really interest has dramatically increased in the last few years.
Well, thank you. And Mark, if I may also pose a question to you, being the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, and I believe you are sitting on one of the world's largest primary cobalt ore body. So I wonder how you see this question, about the harvesting of the polymerical nodules.
Well, let's put it into a Cook Islands perspective.
Right.
My country is 2 million square kilometers in size, and to put that into US context, that's about 3 times the size of Texas, or about 5 times the size of California, depending on your politics. But that 2 million square kilometers is 99.99% ocean.
Right.
So looking at our ocean for livelihood, for prosperity, for protection is not an unusual thing for us. We've been aware of our nodule deposit since the 60s. A number of prospecting missions have been conducted over the decades in the 70s and the 80s. But it's now, I guess, that we're seeing a convergence that is, as Michael alluded to, that is making the prospect of seabed minerals very, very attractive. The current and future global demand for certain critical metals, the need to diversify the supply source, and for us, the diversification of our own economy is vitally important. COVID has told us that the reliance on our single tourism-based economy was devastating when we closed our borders for 2 years. So the push for our country to look at diversification, supported by this global demand for critical metals, the advent of technology, and we can see behind us some of the footage that we developed over the last year and our exploration programs, really allows us to look at this particular industry in the past seen as possibly science fiction, but today seen as science. So it provides a huge opportunity for us as a country to lift prosperity levels, to provide opportunities for our people in new areas of endeavor that we've probably never thought of before. And the increased prosperity allows us, of course, to build resilience against the impacts of climate change.
Right.
It allows us to have a standard of living that our people didn't have previously, to be educated at any university in the world, to be able to travel between our islands at reduced costs, have a level of healthcare and social security that is challenging for us right now. So those are some of the opportunities of why we're looking to our deep ocean.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you. But you also know that there are, and it's a question to both of you, there are different types of environmental risk associated with harvesting seabed minerals. And what we see on the screen is polymedical nodules, the bottom of the deep sea. But what measures both the International Seabed Authority but also the Cook Islands can you take to mitigate eventual environmental impacts on this? So maybe start with you, Michael.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I mean, there's no such thing as any human activity that has zero impact.
Right.
So there is environmental impact. It has to be managed. I guess the major concern, which I fully understand and I get, is that the deep seabed, 6,000 meters water depth, it's an area where there has been very little anthropogenic impact so far. I'm not going to say no anthropogenic impact because, believe it or not, we've already found that microplastics have made their way to the bottom of the sea and to the seabed. So we can't think in terms of zero impact. And that's why we take a highly precautionary approach to the whole program of exploration and exploitation. And again, to emphasize, no exploitation is taking place at the moment. We're currently still in the exploration phase. I don't know if it's possible to put up the slide, the map that
We'll have that.
asked them to put behind just for a minute or two, just to see. There we go. This basically shows the distribution of known marine mineral deposits and the current exploration activity that is taking place in international waters under the International Seabed Authority. As you can see, the US is conspicuously absent from that picture, but many other countries are there. 30 projects around the world. And I guess that the emphasis has been over the past 30 years. We are 30 years old this year. The emphasis has been on collecting environmental data, baseline data, and data that will later inform permitting processes for exploitation. As I said, ocean technology is constantly evolving. It's getting better and better. Recently, we've had a number of very successful collector tests that are giving us a very, very good indication of the sort of potential environmental impacts, but more importantly, how to manage those impacts and the sort of regulations that we, as the international regulator, will need to put in place to ensure that environmental impacts are minimized. Also, measures that, through their participation in the International Seabed Authority, countries like the Cook Islands and other small island developing countries in Africa and even landlocked countries, can also participate and can learn, can benefit from technology transfer, can benefit from global science. We use the best available science, which means the global science, to inform our environmental regulation. Even though the US is not a full member of the authority, I do want to emphasize that we work very closely with many US scientific institutions and US scientific experts to inform the development of really first-class, world-standard environmental regulations. So there is really no prospect of this industry happening without the most strict environmental regulation, because it's under the focus like a laser. People are watching what happens. So this is the front and center of our work.
Well, thank you. I'm also thinking for you, Mark. You know, what you look at is exclusive economic zone, so it falls under your jurisdiction. And how was your approach, and where does it differ from, for example, International Seabed Authority, or where is it similar? And how can you, as a state, as a country, in a way, inspire others to have the right approach to this? How can we learn from you?
Well, firstly, let me re-emphasize again the point that Michael has made. Currently, there is no harvesting operation that has been undertaken in our ocean. Right now, the exploration phase that we're going through ensures that at this stage, we are collecting the information needed on the biodiversity, the environmental impacts that may occur for any activity to take place in the deep ocean. Those studies, that information, that data we're getting coming to us now, allows us to understand the megafauna, the microorganisms that live either in the sediment or down at that depth, but also allows us to understand the density of the biodiversity and be able to, as Michael said, put in place proper management plans that mitigate environmental damage once we do take the next step of going to the bottom of the ocean. I think one of the important things also to note is to talk about scale. And when we talk about the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, the sheer size and the scale of even just in our own EEZ in the Cook Islands. And we did some estimations that if you had 3 companies running a mineral harvesting operation over 30 years within our EEZ in different areas, they would be able to use up an area of our EEZ that is just on 1% over a 30-year period with 3 license operations. So it's important to understand the scale and how scale can be also used to mitigate against economic harm, to protect biodiversity that exists in the ocean. But again, the other point that I wanted to raise was that the work that we are conducting right now is based on the precautionary principle. We consider ourselves as Polynesians environmentalists. We've lived in an ocean state for centuries. We have traditional methods of conservation and environmental protection that are used to today. Today, Pacific countries lead the world in terms of protected areas in our oceans. In the Cook Islands, our entire EEZ has been legislated as what we call Marae Moana, which is sacred ocean. There are protected 50 nautical miles around each island, which prohibits commercial fishing, prohibits minerals activities. So already we have in place protective measures to ensure the protection of our marine environment. We've enacted legislation to reduce the use of single-use plastics, which pollute the ocean. So we like to see ourselves as putting in place regulations, environmental regulations, that are not just compliant, but at high standards, the standards that we consider appropriate in terms of protecting our ocean. So for us, turning to our ocean, we will protect our ocean, but we will also harvest from our ocean.
Right. So I hear you both saying, I mean, that we have decades of research in this field. We have developed regulatory framework both in the Cook Islands and International Seabed Authority on environment and a lot of other questions. Technology to harvest or do deep sea mining is maturing. So the question will be also, what is the time frame now? I mean, if I start with you, Michael, yeah, I mean, is there a mining code being adopted next year, which I think the member states had agreed to? What will happen then? Because then, of course, one is to adopt a mining code, but what will the process be for companies and countries to then go for deep sea harvesting of these nodules, for example?
Well, again, just go back in history a little bit. The first step was to put in place an exploration code,
Sure.
and that was done. more than 25 years ago now, and as you saw on that slide, exploration has been very successful. It's attracted a lot of investment and a lot of interest, and it's continuing to attract interest. Just this year, we got 2 new exploration applications from India, which shows the priority that India is given to this sector. And we've been working now for, I think, almost 6 years on the next phase, which is, as those exploration projects become increasingly mature, putting in place the regulatory framework that will allow for the transition to exploitation. Now, in some ways, that transition is already happening because we've seen tests of mining technology take place at various scales in the past few years. India has tested its technology. Japan has tested its technology inside its own waters. The Belgian contractor has tested, and the metals company that spoke yesterday has also had a successful test of technology. So we're learning from that. And the mining code has to be adopted by our membership. It's the task of the ISA Council. It has set itself a deadline to adopt the mining code by 2025. I feel quite optimistic about that. The council meets again next week. It's a very participatory, transparent process. If anybody is interested, God knows why you would be interested, but you can tune in and watch it online and watch paint dry. But it's all taking place in under the spotlight. I feel confident that we'll meet that deadline. It's something that the countries themselves have agreed to. And then the permitting process begins, and the regulations will lay down a elaborate permitting process. It's very interesting because I had a lot of discussion in the room yesterday about the difficulty of permitting everywhere, about, let's say, political capriciousness in some countries. And I know there's places where royalty rates have been raised overnight and so on, but I think that's one important distinction between national and international global frameworks. Global framework is very, very difficult to put in place. You need effectively a consensus of 168 countries, and that's difficult, as you know, as a former foreign minister. But once it's in place, it's a very robust framework because it's certainly not going to change overnight. So once those rules are there, it's also a level playing field. Everybody has to play by the same rules. Everybody goes through the same permitting process. There is no corruption. There is no capriciousness. So I feel confident that once that's in place, then there is that stable platform for industry to start to invest and mobilize the resources that they need to move forward.
Well, if I just may follow up briefly on that, because we know that the member states of ISA, they have different approaches to this. It's fair to say, and coming from Europe, it's something that I've dealt with also, of course, in my previous position. But when a mining code is in place and there will be an application, it has to be reviewed by the legal and technical commission, and then it eventually will be processed or approved or rejected. So is in that process, is there a risk that some of these things will not, materialize, or what will, because there's a risk. We're talking about mining code in 2025, and we're talking about this process after. So what do you see there of the challenges or risk that we will find ourselves in?
Well, there is a decision-making process.
Right.
We have only 7 minutes, and the International Seabed Authority Council is probably the most complex.
So we don't want to go into the detail,
decision-making process anywhere. But let me just say that it's very finely balanced. It reflects all interests: land-based mining interests, major importers' interests, contractors' interests, so on. So it's there. It's finely balanced. Assuming that an application is well justified, technically, financially, environmentally, data, then there is a clear pathway to approval. And at the end, there is a structured voting process and a dispute settlement process that is all built into the scenario. So there is a very, very clear pathway and a clear scenario that people can approach with confidence.
Right. Mark, may I ask you the same question on the time frame for the Cook Islands, and how does it look for you? When will you start actually harvesting these fantastic polymedical nodules we see on the screen there?
I think it was the birds, or was it Ecclesiastes that said there is a season for everything.
Yeah.
But I certainly believe that the time for seabed minerals harvesting is now. We've been fortunate to be a member of the ISA and be a sponsor of a concession in the ISA area, whilst at the same time developing the robust legal frameworks that are required to provide assurance to potential investors, to companies that want to do business in our waters. So we believe what we have in place over the years that we've developed this, we've been in this business now for more than 15 years, is world-class and is of a standard that has taken into account difficulties that may be associated with dealing with a large organization like the ISA, and provide an opportunity for dealing with a single sovereign state, whilst at the same time providing very clear guidelines for any company that wants to come in and do business in our waters. Right. As to the question of when, part of the regulations that we've put in place on the exploration phase and also will be in place for the harvesting operations, there are certain milestones and key things that companies must do. Right. An environmental impact statement, a pre-feasibility study. We need this as a country to enable us to make informed decisions on whether we proceed. We believe that the onus is on the companies to do this work. The sooner they do it, the sooner we'll be in a position to make a decision on that. But I have no doubt, as I said before, that there are a number of factors converging that will accelerate or push forward the process that each of the companies needs to go through and demonstrate, so that we as a country will be in a position to issue licenses moving forward.
Right. Because I think we're all asking ourselves, which countries will go first? Is it the Cook Islands? Is it China? Is it India? Is it Norway, a country in Europe that also works in an exclusive economic zone and looking for another type of deep sea mining? So I think that's a question, and maybe we should end by having that question answered. You know, what will happen? Which countries will be the first movers in your view here? I mean, maybe start with you, Michael. I know it's a tricky question, and you cannot say much. You have to be.
That's really putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
I mean,
sorry.
It's very hard to say. I mean, the interest is certainly there. We've seen very strong interest in Asia. I was in Japan last week or 2 weeks ago, and the progress has been remarkable. India is moving very fast, and it is one of Prime Minister Modi's top priorities. We also have a number of the private sector companies, the TMC that you saw yesterday, and the Belgians that are in a project with the Cook Islands are also moving very, very fast. So it's very hard to say, and I wouldn't stick my neck out, but and I wouldn't really want to stick my neck out as to whether it will happen in national waters first or in international waters. Yeah. To me, there's no competition. There's no winners or losers here. Mineral demand is increasing so rapidly that I don't see that there's any losers. I think it's for everybody's benefit that we develop this supply of minerals, that we meet that demand that is continuing to grow and is only going to continue to grow over the coming years.
Right. And also for you, Mark, I mean, maybe I should reframe the question, because you are well advanced in this, we heard today. Do you feel you have the sufficient support from the rest of the world in what you're doing, including from, I come from Europe, including from European countries, because I've at least experienced some lack of understanding among my colleagues in my time in office.
That's always a challenge. Anything new will always bring some reluctance and resistance. So as I said, this journey that we've been undertaking is also bringing, firstly, our own people along on this journey, so they understand exactly what we're doing as a country, enables me as a leader to be able to come to forums like this, to attend meetings in other countries and speak with conviction about our commitment to this particular industry. I don't see this as a race so much. If anything, it's a marathon. It's not so much how you start, it's how you're going to carry out your operations. As Michael said, really what's pushing the encouragement in this sector is the global demand for critical metals.
Right.
And if we listen to the World Bank, if we listen to the International Energy Agency, the projections that are coming through, there is certainly plenty of demand for new entrants to come into the field, for a alternative supply, diversification of supply to come in. If we look at current nickel production, for example, a lot of nickel today comes from Indonesia. And the laterite deposits maybe 20 years ago were not economically viable. Today they are. So we look at this particular industry not from a short term. We look at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, how this industry will help shape the shift that we're seeing now of the world to electrification, to the reduction of fossil fuels, reduction of carbon emissions, and how we can fit into that. So for us, this is much, much more than just the race to get started first. This is about setting good, sound foundations to enable sustainable economy that'll help prosper our people and those who will benefit from these minerals over the decades.
No, I think you made a very important point here also. And if you see some of the environmental problems on land, we saw an example from Indonesia yesterday on nickel mining. I think one could wish that we zoom out and look where do we actually harvest or mine the resources we need for the green transformation, for our energy security, in the most sustainable way, the most efficient way. And I think what you did today, this panel, you shed a light on how that could happen. So I want to end this panel by thanking you, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Mark Brown of the Cook Islands, and also Secretary General Michael Lodge from the International Seabed Authority, for shining lights on this very important topic. And if I may add for my own personal note that this discussion on how to source minerals and how we find it, it can really benefit our economy and our national security. It can accelerate, as you also alluded to, the needed green transformation of our economy to fulfill the Paris Agreement. So I think there's a lot to it. We cannot cover everything, but I think we had a good discussion. Thank you so much, and give them a hand. Thank you.
Thank you.